Yeah, I believe it is. Okay, we got Dr. John Newman coming in. David, have you got him online at all? Okay.
Dr. Newman, are you ready?
Yep, I'm here. I can hear you.
All right, Dr. Newman and Casey Quinlan, I'm going to introduce you here. So
Okay.
give me a little line here. Our next speaker is coming into us on Zoom, and it is Dr. John Newman. Dr. John Newman is an adjunct professor of political science at James Madison University. He is a retired U.S. Army intelligence officer and served as a military assistant to the Director General William Odom at the National Security Agency. Newman is the author of JFK in Vietnam, Oswald and the CIA, and Quest for the Kingdom, The Secret Teachings of Jesus in the Light of Yogic Mysticism. He is currently at work producing a series on the life, public service, and assassination of President Kennedy, Volume 1, Where Angels Tread Lightly, Volume 2, Into the Storm, and Volume 3, Countdown to Darkness. Soon to be published late spring, early summer 2022, are Volumes 4, The Search for Popov's Mole, and Volume 5, Armageddon. A supplemental volume on America in the 1960s with, let me see if I got the right thing here. With prosecuted truths, produced vital new facts, and challenged many new commonly accepted assumptions in the interpretations. Newman's ongoing work demystifies our hidden history and illuminates the darkest passages of America in the Cold War. New doors are about to open. His works are history in the making. John Newman has been with us for quite a while, and he is one of the godfathers of writing the history for John F. Kennedy. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. John Newman.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you for that introduction. I just want to thank David Denton and all the CSI JFK group, Casey and Brian and David Knight for inviting me here to do this. So I only have a short time. I'm not planning on doing a Q&A, but I might field one question or something like that at the end of this short presentation. This is the reason that everything has changed. Instead of just fooling around with the screen, this is the cover of Volume 4, Uncovering Popov's Mole. Piotr Popov, the fact that he was a GRU officer, military intelligence officer for the KGB. He defected in 1952 and lasted until about 1958. So I went to, and Jay and Heather Fear, research associates of mine, we went out to San Francisco in mid-January to do a private briefing before some very smart people that write books on the case, just to see how this felt to them. And once it was over, the question, actually there was quiet in the room for a while. And the question, the overriding question is, where did you find this information from? And there are really three areas that it came from. One was the 2017-2018 release of documents. Another one was, believe it or not, my original copy, or the 1995 edition of Oswald and the CIA, and tracking the moles, the KGB mole and the CIA is what we're talking about here, tracking that mole's travels through Central Europe, all came from civil records. And we sometimes forget about looking at civil records. I used Ancestry. There are other platforms as well, but it really opened up a lot of doors for all the other evidence that we have. Anyway, I want to talk to you about how the decision was actually made. Let me just read a little something real quick here to get a lot of things on the table without fumbling around. Two of the greatest counterintelligence minds in the Cold War were the CIA Central Intelligence Agency Pete Bagley and the KGB Sergei Kondrashev. They first met a few years after the fall of the USSR in March of 1994 in a quiet corner of the breakfast room at a gathering of retired spy chiefs from both sides of the divide. On Bagley's mind at that meeting with Kondrashev was a 1957 meeting with Vladislav Kovshuk, who was working against the United States Embassy in Moscow for years. Anyway, he went in 1957 to Washington, D.C. to meet with this KGB mole in the CIA. And that was on Bagley's mind when he met with Kondrashev. And Kondrashev was the most knowledgeable counterintelligence officer ever produced and knew all the answers. And so Bagley walked up to him as he recognized him sitting in a corner of the breakfast room. And Bagley said, well, tell me then, there's something that has been bothering me for a long time. Why ever did Kovshuk make that trip to Washington? Kondrashev could have deflected the question of pretended ignorance, but instead he answered matter-of-factly and right away, oh, that was to meet an important agent. And after a brief pause, he added, one who was never recovered. So just 10 minutes into their acquaintance, the Soviet spy master had confirmed that Popov's mole in fact existed and had never been caught. Thereafter, the two spy chiefs enjoyed a long and close relationship. And we've benefited from that a lot because a lot of the things that we've know a little bit about have been attested to because of that later friendship between Bagley and Kondrashev. But Kondrashev never gave up the identity of this ghost, as he calls them, ghosts of the spy wars. So when I pulled down the curtain, quite suddenly, when I reached the end of Into the Storm, because I realized there were things I didn't know there, I made a promise to take another look at the 70-year-old Phantom in Armageddon. Now, in the summer of last year, after 3 years of work on Armageddon, with publication planned by early fall of last year, I began to notice in the battle between the two spy services, too many things were going wrong for the CIA and too many things were too easy for the KGB. And I realized I had a feeling I had really missed something along the way, all these years and all those books, but I'm not afraid to look for mistakes and admit them if I find them. To my surprise, I had to go all the way back to my 1995 work, Oswald and the CIA, to find the answer. And there it was. It had been in front of me the whole time, as it had been for all of us. The problem was that the key to this puzzle was something that no one would ever even have imagined. So I told you where the records were from, but let me go on now to, as I went through the evidence with my research associates that we presented at San Francisco in January, at every turn we found low-hanging fruit. So much has changed. And so my research associates suggested that I devote a separate volume to solving this conundrum before publishing Armageddon. And my first MLK book that is already ready for publication. Although I was reluctant at first, I changed my mind and I'm very fortunate that I did so. So because this is such a controversial call that I'm going to be making in this book, and it's like the only other time that I had a problem worrying about a lot of the antibodies that would be jumping on me, and that was JFK in Vietnam. And so the order in which I interviewed people, I saved the antibodies for the last. so that they wouldn't get out in front of me to try and knock it down beforehand, although they tried afterwards to suppress the book. Anyway, I embargoed the contents of the book until publication, but it's coming around the corner. After San Francisco, when I returned home, I went on to Facebook and showed the cover of the book, and I decided to give 2 clues to everybody, and I'll repeat them now. The first one was that James Angleton was not the wizard behind the curtain. And if you've ever seen that movie or play, you know what I'm talking about. And the second clue was that James Angleton was looking in the wrong place for the mole, in the KGB mole of the CIA. And that's all I put on the table. Well, I'm going to give up 2 more clues today, right now. The third one is this. The CIA mole hunt that dangled Oswald as U-2 flypaper was a false mole hunt. The first time that word came to my head, I realized what a eureka experience it was. And the same thing happened to Malcolm Blunt when he heard it, and various other researchers. We'd never thought about a false mole hunt, let alone who was really behind the mole hunt. I'm still going to keep that until the end of next month. And finally, the fourth clue is that the KGB mole in the CIA was not, as some people have thought, like J. Edward Epstein and some others, was not Edward Ellis Smith, who was the first CIA station in Moscow, the embassy there. He becomes involved, and he does become a penetration at the time of that Kovshok trip to see the mole in 1957, but he was not a high echelon penetration at all. So he's not Popov's mole. So that's basically what I have to say to you today. I'm willing to take 1 or 2 questions as long as they're not too intrusive.
Okay, guys, it sounds like Dr. Newman's got what, about 3 books that are coming out pretty soon. And are there any questions that we could field here for Dr. Newman? David, you have something up there? Okay. I have a question. Dr. Newman, in a timeline sequence, when do you expect Popov's mole to be coming out?
The end of next month. Where it's coming right around the corner, and I'm getting up every day at 3 o'clock in the morning, and everybody else is too. We're doing our best to try and get it out then, and move directly into Armageddon by sometime in September. And after that, the MLK book will come out pretty quickly because it's ready to go.
Okay, so you should have 2 of them pretty much back to back.
Yeah.
All right, and the last one, Armageddon, you expect that to be toward the end of the year?
No, that's the MLK book will go last. I wanted to get these, finish these 2 volumes of the series that I'm working on here on the Kennedy presidency and assassination. And so they're going to go first, and they're going to be close together, end of May and sometime in September, and then probably another 6 to 7 weeks to clean up the MLK book.
We do have a question. What is it?
Yeah, it's in the chat log here. It's from Bruce Torres, and he just wants to know if you have read the Skorzeny papers or Coup in Dallas, and what do you think of them?
I've read them, and I met the author years ago. My misgiving is that the source work is missing, and I've learned the hard way, not even to depend on one source, let alone virtually none. So in doing this work that I'm doing now, I require at least double independent attestation, 2 independent sources, if not more, to put it into the column of believability. So it's a high standard, but it's safer that way, especially with all the deceptions that have been laid on our path over the years.
We have a question. Hold on.
And I know this is maybe a generalized question, John. I don't know if you can hear me. But, you know, I'm interested in your approach with the King assassination. Are you looking at a level of potential military involvement in the assassination of Martin Luther King? Did you catch that?
Dr. Newman, did you catch that question?
I did. I'm not going to answer the MLK question because it's a totally new thing too. But what the first part of it, I believe, what has to do with what my views might or might not be about any involvement of the military. And I did address this for 2 days with you guys about a year or so ago, 2 nights in a row. It was a long
Right.
presentation. And in fact, I did address directly involvement of both the CIA and the Pentagon is not the right word, but officers that, you see, the officers move around. Most of the high echelon civilians kind of stay in place, but military officers come in for a couple of years and they move over to another agency. And so they have no loyalties to those particular agencies, but they have loyalties to each other. And I talked about in the CSI Dallas presentation about that problem and about how people that were officers, especially military officers, who were involved in World War II and involved in all that happened afterwards, in the OSS and elsewhere, ended up in control of everything fine during the Kennedy administration. And so tracking all of them and their mentors and mentees and who was in what group is very important information. And I found that I think that we're looking more at a military operation. But the CIA's role, they don't kill people very good, actually. They tried that with the mob, and the mob laughed at that because it was a real treat. They could do whatever they wanted and just say, sorry, I can't tell you, I'm working for the CIA. But what they do well is propaganda and that's the sort of work that they're very good at. Psychological warfare, propaganda. And so that was their role. The framing of Oswald, along with Castro and the KGB, 6 weeks before the murder, it was hidden in files over in an FPCC file over in the Special Affairs Staff, not available until the shots rang out in Dealey Plaza. That was the cover-up. That was what allowed, at the secret level, the ability to push Earl Warren right over the edge to, go ahead along with this false story, because he was concerned, as he said on television here in Washington, D.C., that he thought 40 million Americans were going to die. And so that stayed in place for a long time. It wasn't until the 70s that the Senate and House began to look into this. And that's when the perpetrators lined up their guys in military intelligence, whether it's Air Force or Army, to lay deceptions and misdirections in our paths to control the narrative of what was going to come out of those committees. So it's getting rid of the detritus, these barnacles on the ship is the first thing we've got to do if we're ever going to see a clear picture of what was going on. And I spent a lot of time in volume 3 taking care of, Vesiana and and Sam Halpern and then others that I put into that category. And I'm continuing that work now with volume 4, uncovering Popov's mold.
Okay, are there any other questions out there? We've had several of them. David, any from the Zoom?
Got one right here, one question right here, I believe. Go ahead.
Yes, can you give us a preview of how this
Okay, Dr. Newman, can you give us a preview of what is in Armageddon and how it relates to today?
Well, I spoke, as I said, at great length for 2 nights in a
Right.
row. So how about just a few examples of things that are brand new? Howard Burris, Howard Leigh Burris was supposed to be Lyndon Johnson's, as a Vice President Lyndon Johnson's aide. His real boss was not Lyndon Johnson at all. It was a guy named General Birkenau, who was way up in the air staff in the Pentagon. And Birkenau had a lot to do with other things like the Tonkin Gulf business and other false flag operations. Anyway, the bottom line is, after a lot of research on the relationship between Johnson and Burris, was that Burris was the case officer and Johnson was the understudy. I'll leave that at that. You know, I don't want to take up too much time here. I know we're behind this. So let me move off to another one. I was looking very closely at General Taylor. Even as early as JFK in Vietnam, I realized he was doing things that went against the things that Kennedy told him he wanted to do. And then I realized in the second edition of JFK in Vietnam that Taylor had actually completely gutted the withdrawal plan that Kennedy had ordered to take place in the last 6 weeks of Kennedy's life. So in Armageddon, I began to take a very close look at all aspects. In fact, I would just like to say this: the first person long ago who raised issues and suspicions about General Maxwell Taylor was Peter Dale Scott. Anyway, the title of the chapter is General Taylor, a Trojan horse inside the gates. And that's going to be the argument that you'll see there when Armageddon comes out.
And I would tell you people here, as well as the people who are on Zoom, that when Dr. Newman presented that, I think it was a 2-day presentation on projectjfk.com, all of that is housed in that website, and you can pull that down and you can see that 2-day presentation that Dr. John Newman presented. So if you get on projectjfk.com and go through the different intervals, you'll find that you can pull his material down, of which he is referring to right now. All right, any other questions for Dr. Newman? I think there was there a question from Pete Hyman?
Yeah, it says, how deep do you feel about military involvement in today's domestic issues, social, political, biological, and cyberspace? Yeah, Dr. Newman, we have a question from Peter Hyman that says, how deep do you feel about military involvement in today's domestic issues, social, political, biological, and cyberspace?
Well, I don't have access to classified information. So like the rest of us, we have, what's on television, and then maybe some analysis you can try and come up with for that. I think that the military problems that we've had in the past, although I don't want to get ahead of my skis and say they don't exist, when every time I turn around, I find, another example of it. But we're in the middle of a political war going on right now, as well as the real war going on in Ukraine. We've been going since the Trump presidency began. Our democracy is being torn apart from the inside politically. And I think that General Milley and some of the military officers are the ones that did their best to keep a lot of this stuff in bounds and to preserve the election as it was, and that also are doing a reasonable job without throwing us headlong into a nuclear war here to try and help the Ukrainians beat the daylights out of these forces that Putin has put in there. So I don't see the military paradigm that we lived through in the last century as much of a problem as I see what's happening all around us now. And it is threatening democracy everywhere and giving rise to more of these strong men, dictators, and that's frightening to me. And it's just as bad as the Gladio experience was that we and the British were in on for 40 years, false flag operations and things like that. So nobody's hands are clean, really, as you go back the last 80 or 90 years. But I don't see the military is the big problem now, as I would say that on all the stuff that I'm writing about, it is. I mean, I wrote 3 chapters, new chapters in this book, volume 4, on Popov's Mole, covering the arsenals of nuclear insanity that were put together under 3 presidents, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy. Kennedy's the one who stopped it, by the way, tried to put some constraints on this. And he succeeded for a while until he died. And then, it went back to normal. Is how many warheads can each side provide? And the Russians had been very much behind, and we went into Vietnam stupidly. And then at least, I guess I should say the one good thing about the Soviet Union getting a lot of warheads was that at least there was some parity there, and less likely for a war to occur than it was when we wanted to do it. Our generals wanted to do that. They wanted to wipe out all communist countries off the face of the earth. And that was an idea that came up in June 1961. Kennedy walked out in disgust and said, and we call ourselves human race. But that idea was still in train in the fall of 1963.
All right. Any other questions? David, anything?
Let me bow out
Go ahead.
because I know you guys are behind schedule, and it was fun to be with you today, and I'm looking forward to getting some feedback from y'all when the volume 4 comes out.
Well, guys, could you give a round of applause for Dr. John Newman? Dr. Newman, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Brian.
Mute again.